What's the fastest you ever quit a job and why? At one of those quick lube oil change places when I was about 18, they had me down in the pit under the vehicles, draining the oil, and I kept getting burned by hot oil and by hot exhaust pipes. On the second day, I said I had to use the bathroom, and when I walked around to the side of the building, I took off running and didn't come back. Story 2. 15 minutes. Applied for and accepted a job that was advertised as solely data entry, evening shifts. Got there, did the quick intro meet and greet thing, and was handed a mobile phone. No word of a lie, supervisor goes, "It's actually a cold calling role. No one would apply if we said that, so we tell people it's data entry." I went, "Sorry, what?" He goes, "Yeah, we could call people for this idea. My friend is asking for investors. You'll get a commission if you do well." At that point in time, I was a salty, snarky young lady, so I told him to shove it, that this was probably illegal in so many ways. I applied for data entry, not cold calling and swindling people, etc., etc. Called my dad to come pick me up and never looked back. Took a legit data entry offer the next day. So, yeah, 15 minutes. Found out many years later that dude and the friend with the great idea both got done on some serious fraud charges shortly after my run-in with them. Story 3. I'm a vet tech. I quit a clinic after about 3 weeks when the doctor told me to start reusing needles. He wanted me to pull up a vaccine, administer it, to pull the next vaccine up into the same syringe with the same needle, and repeat. That was the final straw. The first straw was finding out that it was a small practice with 2 other techs and 1 receptionist, were required to bring our own toilet paper to work. Story 4. I was hired by a temp agency to file documents in a paint factory office. And when I showed up, I was put on the assembly line with 0 training or instruction, and the cans came down the conveyor belt at 10,000 miles. I don't even know what I was supposed to do. I just let every can whiz by. I quit end of day 1. Story 5. Applied at a trashy local gas station in Oregon. The lady at the counter said there's a $60 charge to test for substances in Oregon. I said, "Give me my resume back." She then started fake laughing and going on a tirade about how entitled I am on my way out. She didn't even own the store. I don't even smoke. I just thought the charge was arbitrary and a little sketchy. Story 6. In college, I got a summer job at Sea Ray Boats through a temp agency. Showed up first thing and they had me sit in the break room, which was on the 2nd floor, overlooking the entire plant. Waited an hour for someone to come get me and heard a commotion. Looked out and 3-4 people were running out because a dude cut off his middle and ring fingers with a Sawzall. The dude behind him had his fingers in a towel. At the time, I wasn't what you might call tool handy, so I noped right the duck out. Story 7. I had an interview that was unlike any other interview I've ever had. It was a room full of other applicants and the interviewer. The interviewer was telling us about the job, asked if anyone had any questions, then said we were all hired. I didn't fill any paperwork out, thank goodness. After he said we were all hired, half the people, including myself, walked out. The job was to go door to door selling knives, and we would have to pay $2,000 for our demo set of knives. Nope, no thanks. Story 8. First day. Got out of the Marines and got a job doing hardwood floors for 10HR. Didn't tell me I had the job, then called and asked where I was. Used a whole tank of gas driving from job to job. First thing boss asked me was, "Are you messed up from the war?" Yes, I am. Every employee told me how much they hate the job and to run. Finished the day and quit. Story 9. Sandwich shop. Health inspector showed up, found mop cleaning solution in the tub. They were keeping the utensils they use make sandwiches with. Get meatballs out for subs, spread tuna on sandwiches, etc. That explained the very odd burning chemical smell from that area. The mop cleaner was mixing with the meatballs and sauce and just cooking all day in that pot. Owner argued that it was safe to use it that way. He'd dump it out in front of him. The second he left, she filled it back up and put all the utensils back in it. Story 10. Within 30 minutes of finishing filing all the HR paperwork, I sat down at my new desk, opened my backpack, and started organizing all the books I brought when my new boss came over and made a comment that didn't sit well with me. He expressed his disappointment in me for not filling out the paperwork with a sense of urgency and said he hopes this isn't a habit. When he left to go back to his office, I opened up my email and wrote a brief paragraph to the effect of, "I can see you run a tight ship here. I don't believe this is a good fit for either of us." I packed up my books and walked out the front door. Again, literally 30 minutes. Turns out, this was the best decision I could have made, as I almost immediately found a new job that paid 40% more. The job I walked out on paid $58,000 as an IT field engineer. I went on to work as an infrastructure engineer, my job until this day. 81K start, 100 paisha. Story 11. I worked at Party City and was closing. Someone crap in the bathroom but not in the toilets. It was on the floor, the walls, and the stall doors, in the sinks, and the soap dispensers, and for an added effect, They had smashed the dispense button a few times. Violent. I was not on bathroom duty that evening, but for whatever reason, my mod told me to clean it up. Hell to the no. I told her I wasn't cleaning that biohazard and that my 7.25 an hour wasn't worth it. Plus, there was no way in hell I could clean all of that up in the 30 minutes before I had to clock out or get written up for being over. My manager, the living embodiment of Shrek, said she'd write me up for failing to complete my closing checklist. Again, wasn't on bathrooms that evening. So, in my best judgment, I went and clocked out and left. Never came back. I was scheduled to open the next morning, but nope. My GM sent me an email confirming my termination and said, "You'll always be welcome back should you choose to come in." Story 12. I worked in the call center for the university I attended. The job was to basically call alumni and get them to donate money to the school. There was a computer that would automatically call people for you. Most people simply did not answer the call because they had caller ID or didn't recognize the number. So most time was spent staring at a computer listening to a phone ringing with nobody answering it. If somebody did answer the phone, there was a script we had to go by to try and get them to donate. We were required to ask at least 4 times and lower the amount each time before we could hang up. For example, maybe starting by asking for $200 and working down to $50. We couldn't take no for an answer, no matter what the response was, until we asked for money 4 times. If somebody said, "Sorry, I can't afford to donate, my husband has cancer," we would be required to use the script and say, "I'm so sorry to hear you are dealing with medical bills. But did you know the school is building a new football stadium? Can I get you to donate $50? Needless to say, between the boredom of nobody answering and the terrible and awkward feeling of asking for somebody else's money over and over, if they did answer, I quit after my first 2 hours there. Just got up and told the supervisor it wasn't for me and left. Story 13. Dishwasher and I lasted 1 shift. I was 19. The owner's chef was a nice guy, but I knew this wasn't the job for me maybe 1 hour into my shift. Finished the shift, told him I wasn't coming back, and asked for $40 cash to call it even. He obliged, even gave me a bowl of risotto. Story 14. 15 minutes before I got there. I had a weird feeling about the job and how vague the hiring manager was being. Halfway to my first day, it dawned on me that it was some traveling door-to-door sales crap. The kind where they pack you in a van and drive you to some neighborhood to sell coupon books or whatever. Story 15. I left 2 months after being hired. I tried to be patient and understanding through the crew, but they kept treating me like crap. I had a big argument with my boss's mother, who worked with us too, and obviously she sided with her. A lot of crap happened, and on my last day I was supposed to have a code for some new gate that my boss didn't give me. I think she did that to annoy me. So in my head I was like, I go to work today, and if the gate's actually closed, I'm leaving my post and never come back. If it's open, then I work. I never had the response to that dilemma because I got into a car crash on the way to work. After 1H, I sent a message to my boss saying that I wasn't able to make it due to my car accident, and she had the audacity to yell at me because I told her too late. She didn't ask if I was okay. At the end of the day, I was kind of happy as I knew they were in a pretty crafty situation because I was supposed to work alone and they had to do all my crap. I bet they were pissed. Story 16. About 2 weeks. Applied for the University Center's info desk. They hired me after they'd already trained the other new hires. It was something like 8-10 hours of training, but I got about half an hour of "here's where this is" hand-waving. I was a new freshman, so unable to answer most questions off the top of my head. And we were supposed to sell bus passes from a special register I never got trained to use. I did my absolute best, but kept getting yelled at for not knowing how to do things. And when I asked for training, they said no because they'd already held the training. Got sick of getting scolded and feeling lost and set up for failure and just told them I'm not coming back. Story 17. 2 days. I worked at Walmart before and quit to start a gig in trucking. Got about a year into the trucking before I decided maybe I wanted to be home more. So I quit my job and got hired at Walmart within a week, which was perfect. It was for a deli position, which was cool. Never worked deli before. I was always an overnight stalker. First day was mostly computer work. Second day was partial computer work, followed by a half day on the job. I crap you not. The first hour I was in the deli, I get an older lady, 65 plus, requesting ham sliced as thin as possible. So I asked the chick training me for some help, and she got it to the lowest setting. And when I shaved a practice piece off, I asked if it was good. She says, "No, I've gotten it thinner before." So I asked my training chick, and she says, "Ma'am, that's as thin as we go." The woman didn't like this answer. She proceeds to say, "That might be thin enough for you lard asses, but I need my thinner." At this point, I was already debating on throwing this ham at her and quitting, and her statement about sent me over the edge. While I didn't launch the ham slice at her, I did throw it on the counter and told the old woman where she could shove that ham. Walked into the back room, clocked out, threw the assistant manager my best, and told them today was my last day, and that some old hag needs help in deli. I called my trucking company the next days, and within 2 weeks, they had me in a truck and down the road. I'll never do customer service again. Kudos to everyone who's stuck it out this long. I did it for 10 plus years, and once I got out, I'll never go back. Story 18. When I was 21 years old, nearly 25 years ago, I was working for an IT consulting firm and sent to a job to support the network for a large tech company near Boston. Their campus was spread over several blocks in Cambridge, and they had several thousand users. When I arrived, I was brought directly into a full staff meeting of the network team. The team lead explained that he had been hired somewhere else, and when he told the company we worked for that, he was leaving. There was some dispute about who leadership of the team of about 8 people should fall to. Basically, everybody wanted to be the boss. In their infinite Solomon-esque wisdom, the agency that staffed this team decided that if they couldn't agree, then they didn't get any say, and had sent me, still wet behind the ears, to lead the team instead. Consequently, today was all of their last day, and starting tomorrow I would be on my own. I was a dumb kid, but I wasn't a ducking idiot, so I called the recruiter immediately, told him I wanted no part of this crap, that it was unprofessional as duck to put me in this position, that I would never work for his company again, and I would advise everyone I ever came into contact with that they shouldn't either, and that I am quitting right now, and walked out of there at 9:22 a.m. Story 19. This was almost 20 years ago in Dallas. It's a long story, but I was hired at a call center and I made it to the first training. The people I was with were super nice, the supervisor was pleasant, and I even took a couple of practice calls. But as I was driving home, I got this enormous sense of dread thinking about going back. I could barely sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I turned off my alarm, went back to bed, and never went in again. Story 20. 8 hours, 1 shift. I was working for a temp agency and they were very specific about what we could and couldn't do for light industrial work. The big one was ladders. We were not to go higher than 8 feet. The agency also set our hours for us, and any changes would need to go through them. So they sent me to a warehouse that makes plastic frames for windows. It's August in the South, and the place has no AC. The entire space reeks from the furnace that melts the plastic and extrudes it into the various molds. My job was to do an updated inventory count. I was contracted to do first shift, 7 a.m., 3 p.m. My supervisor starts off by saying that starting tomorrow, I should come in at 2 a.m. to start that day's count, because it is so much easier to do when it is cool. I told him that he'd have to clear that change with the temp agency. He replied, "No, it's fine. We do it all the time." I then asked if I would be getting a pay bump, because that's technically third shift and those workers get paid more. He immediately changed the subject. As the shift goes on, I'm partnered with a veteran and we have to count everything on the shelves. The shelves go up to 20 feet, so he drives over a scissor lift. No straps, no safety harness. I look at him and tell him that the temp agency only lets me go up on ladders no taller than 8 feet. He told me to get on and just not tell them. He wants me to lean way out over the edge of the lift to count frames. I finished the shift, drove home, and called the temp agency. I told them about the unauthorized change in schedule and the unsafe working conditions and told them I would not be returning. Story 21. I worked for Buc-ee's in Texas for 2 days. During the interview, they told me that if I had exposed tattoos, I would have to wear compression sleeves to cover them or wear a long sleeve. On my first day of training, I showed up in compression sleeve. Every time I would reach across the counter to check someone out, the compression sleeve would come down on my arm a little, revealing a portion of the tattoo I had on my elbow. Eventually, the manager noticed this and gave me a verbal warning for it. Then, on my break that day, I took my compression sleeves off while I had my lunch, and the manager came through the break room, saw that I had my sleeves off, and gave me a written warning. The next day, I came in a long sleeve shirt, hoping to avoid the same issues. I reached across the counter, and the tattoo on my wrist poked out. The manager then told me that she thinks I'm an idiot for getting tattoos on my arms, and that if I couldn't manage to keep them covered 100% during my duties, she would fire me. I left that night and never went back. Story 22, about 5 minutes after being hired. Enough time to be shown around by the director of nursing and meet the admin. I introduced myself, and he said, "Why should I care?" I just went, "Duck this," and walked out. And story 23, 2 weeks. I was basically left to run an entire laboratory by myself with half a day's training, and the lab manager was leaving for an overseas trip the next day, would wake up with anxiety attacks after dreaming my bedroom was full of lab equipment. Story 24, 6 weeks. Got blamed for another delivery driver leaving the tank close to empty and not parked where it needed to be. I was, huh? A week after I left, they found out it was another driver and they were fired right afterwards. Story 25, 1 week. Worked as a delivery driver for a national pizza chain in high school, got my first paycheck at the end of the week and it was stupidly low. I reported my tips. They deducted them from my hourly wage. Took off my shirt right in front of my manager and literally walked across the parking lot to the Chinese place with a driver's wanted sign in the window. I started driving for them the next day. Story 26. This one lasted about 3 weeks. I had a job where I created software for a college. It paid $8 an hour and I took it because It paid 50 cents more an hour than my other job. This job required me to program web page applications using ASP and a few other languages, as well as grabbing and sorting information from online databases using MySQL. Additionally, I needed to know Adobe Suite to make graphics. I left because my boss would scream at me frequently and pound my desk. All the work was done in a very small office. 3 of us, plus the boss, shared the same space. One time a friend walked by the office and I said hi and had a brief conversation. After about one sentence, the boss screamed at me, telling me I do not talk like that in the office. You do not converse with people when we're working. People here are trying to concentrate. This is a small office and you are far too distracting. He proceeded to walk down the hall after my friend, who left when the boss looked mad, and I presume gave him a lecture. I was in a state of shock. When he left, the other workers in the office turned to me and said, "He gets like that sometimes," and to ignore it. He came back and calmly said that when you talk to people, others in the small office can't concentrate. One time my boss was looking on my monitor and asked me to open Firefox. I accidentally clicked Fireworks, software Adobe used to make. He yelled at me to open the other one, proceeding to pound my keyboard and mouse, trying to cancel the program and open the other. "You do not open that program!" Pounded my keyboard more. "That is not what I told you to do. That is not the right program." I'm not exaggerating when I say he was yelling. This was a small office, about 10x12. This was probably louder than I've ever heard anyone yell. The floor shook. Items shook. My body seemed to do something internally it never had done before, and I was thinking he'd broken my keyboard when pounding it. After the program finally closed and he opened the correct one, he stated calmly that Fireworks takes a while to open, and that's why he didn't want me opening that. Even my time card, which I wrote with the time I showed up for my Aiden Wallach start time, 7:55, 7:58, 7:57, etc., was scratched out, to the point where the page was ripped and replaced with Ada. Okay, I understand the correction, but I've never seen such anger conveyed in a scribble. Besides, I'm used to writing the exact time. We hadn't discussed how to fill out the card. Scary stuff. Story 27. I quit my job at Starbucks 4 hours into my first proper shift. At the time, I'd been the article writer for my friend's small CO business, but I needed more money and got the Starbucks gig as a part-time job. I knew I was a poor fit as soon as I started my orientation in the store. They gave me a coffee passport that I was supposed to use to help me gain a sommelier-like appreciation for the Starbucks coffee blends. I was given several samples of black coffee, which I never drank at the time with milk only, and asked to describe and differentiate them. It was all just bad, and I said so. They seemed a bit surprised that I couldn't recognize hints of this or that, but told me it would come to me soon enough. When I went out onto the floor, I learned quickly that the meme Starbucks orders, half-calf, no-foam soy latte with diet cinnamon, nutmeg, sugar-free vanilla syrup, and 3 shots of espresso, were 100% real, and also every second ducking order. A good third of the customers I served were unfriendly, impatient, and it looked like they'd just smelled someone's fart. That I was a trainee disgusted, quite a few of them, because it meant they'd have to wait an extra minute or two while I tried to figure out how to solve their drink equation without using a calculator. When my friend, with impeccable timing, called me on my break to ask if I wanted to make twice as much money by accepting a new client, I basically said, "Yep, hold on. Let me just quit real quick and I'll head home and meet you on MSN to talk about the details." I said, "Sorry, it's not working out," handed in my apron, and left. To my surprise, I received a call a few days later to come on and collect my share of the tips I'd earned from those few hours. $5 or so. I guess it was for paperwork reasons, so the numbers all worked out, because they probably weren't that fond of me. Bonus, although it doesn't count since I was never hired. 1. I was filling out an application for a job at the brick furniture store when, halfway through, I stopped, looked around the store, realized I didn't actually want to work there, and left my unfinished application still on the display dining room table they'd directed me to sit at. 2. I went into a Radio Shack to take a hiring quiz on their computer. It asked a bunch of questions like, would you ever steal a paperclip from an employer? Or would you turn a coworker you're friends with into the manager because they stole a paperclip? After the first 6 or so questions, I just couldn't be bothered to tell the appropriate lies and started intentionally selecting the most immoral and unprofessional choices. I was not called in for an interview. Story 28. In 2007, I got hired to work at a Hungry Howie's Pizza location in Saginaw, Michigan. I did the 3-hour training while on orientation shift, and then got told I would get called the next week to be told what my regular schedule would be. I finished the shift and come home and turn on the local news. One of the top stories was about how a pizza delivery driver somewhere in the city had to shoot someone who was trying to rob him while he was making a delivery. I drove back to the location and handed them my hat and shirt the same night. Story 29. 18-year-old, got a call to work at a Staples a few towns over, and I was like, not really trying to drive 1HR on the highway to work, but guy convinced me to come in. Worked my first training shift where I was left completely alone in the copy center area for about 5 hours. Lady I was supposed to shadow never came in. There's like printing, copying services, there's a fax machine, a cash register, rows of crap you've never seen or interacted with before. Just started telling people, everything is broken, sorry, oh, my bad. That machine is broken? Yep, the cash register too, sorry. Eventually, I found a vacuum cleaner and just started doing that for a few hours until close. Customers were pissed, but to their credit, didn't take it out on a high school kid who was clearly brand new and probably had deer in headlights look the whole time. Best one was a rep from the PGA Tour came in with no joke, like 10,000 little paper pamphlets in boxes on 5 big dollies. I guess they hand them out to people at PGA events or whatever. Apparently, their quality was unacceptable, and the margins were cut wrong, and the font/color was off, etc. I feigned interest the best I could, and eventually hit him with, sorry, this is my first day. All the machines are broken. No, I don't know where the manager is. Sorry. He wouldn't leave and stood there for about an hour before he left. I actually didn't know where the manager was, so really couldn't help the dude. I never went back. That place was a crap show, though. I did kind of put together what happened later. Someone in the store did mention the PGA order or something to that effect earlier in the day, and got some interesting looks from the workers' managers that I didn't understand. So the disappearing act the manager pulled, plus the normal copy center woman, no showing, plus sticking a day, one worker with zero training in that area, I took a bullet for some massive duck-up that they all knew was coming. I stole a box of Snickers before I left. So honestly, probably worth. Story 30. 5 days. I had a temp job in New Orleans in 1988. I was assigned to an entrepreneur in a small geological services office. Just him at the big desk and me, and a door that went to another room and office he called the library. On the 5th day, he told me to go into the library and begin to organize the table by category for the papers and leaflets scattered all over it. The papers and leaflets were propaganda. He wanted me to organize the next mailing for his group. I didn't even call the head temp office. I just picked up my purse, left my half-eaten sandwich at my desk, and walked out. I ran to the elevator, cried all the way to the parking garage, paid for my half day, didn't ask him to validate my ticket, drove home, 45 minutes. I called the head temp office, and he had already fired me for insubordination. I told them what happened, the whole truth, and they had heard this before from other temps. Story 31. I worked at a hotel for a matter of 3 hours because I listened to the hotel manager talk on the phone about wanting to strangle and murder a staff member. I was taking a training course on the computer, immediately got up and did not return. He seemed off before that, and that did it in for me. Story 32. Around 2 weeks, without trial period. It was a summer job and I was 15 or 16. Restaurant next to the sea. They had accommodation prepared for me and my friend, but it was awful. It was a room for 3 people, me, my friend, her sister, but we had to carry the 3rd bed upstairs because it was initially 2-people room. There were cockroaches and I hit my head on the ceiling every time I woke up. As for the work, me and my friend opened and closed the restaurant, 6 a.m., 10 p.m. usually. Some days we worked 14 hours every day of the week and no free days. We were supposed to be at 4 different places at the same time. It was summer, so the restaurant was full. I mean, there were long queues outside, kind of full. And the only people taking care of clients, cleaning tables and toilets, doing the dishes and helping in the kitchen were me and my friend. We were supposed to have 1 break a day to eat, but we couldn't use it because we didn't want to leave each other alone with this much work. Once we went out to karaoke after work, right next to the restaurant with our older coworker and our boss's marriage, said we are not allowed to go out because we are too young and will probably get drunk. We didn't drink. It was family business, and the bosses, the parents, were awful and had anger issues. Story 33. Babysitting. And the dad came home during lunch and tried to get me in the bedroom with a dirty magazine. I was terrified. Story 34. Gas station Starbucks. 2 months. Manager was incredibly passive-aggressive and stole our tips and input them as sales. She was tight with the owner, so nothing we said mattered. They also charged for every little thing, including water. When it was said and done, a regular beverage was like $9 or $10. Story 35. I quit Tim's because I had no idea where to go. I went to my first day and they told me I was at the wrong location, so I walked to the one they sent me to and I was told that there were no new people starting. Then I tried calling the person who hired me, so they gave me a number to call to find out the right times. I get to the one I'm told to go to, but they don't have anyone starting that day either. I get a call from the Tim's I'm supposed to be at, asking where I am. I ask them their address. And then I get back to the first one I was at. I went in and explained my situation and was told that they aren't the one either. I'm just standing there with a stupid look on my face. So I left to go to the park and sit on my phone, calling, texting, emailing for a couple hours, just to be told to go to the one that sent me away twice already. My shortest time working was the 4 hours I spent playing hide-and-go-seek with Tim Hortons. Story 36. I worked at a family-owned restaurant. It was mostly for extra money. I didn't need the job. The coworkers were really nice, but there were too many responsibilities delegated to us, too much to keep track of. The training was really lackluster, and I didn't get a chance to do anything until I was on my own. I'm not going to go too much into detail about it. A lot of people might think it's just food. How complicated can it be? And if it's poorly organized, it gets complicated very fast. They wanted us to count the cash register after every shift, and if the count was off, they'd take the money from our checks. Also, memorizing the ingredients of every item on the menu instead of just having a menu with the ingredients on it. Another normal thing in restaurant culture that perplexes me. It was stressful and high pressure, and I felt like I didn't get a lot of chances despite doing my best. The final straw was realizing how scared my coworkers were of the managers and every shift they'd warned me about. How if I forgot to wipe one little spot or anything, they'd take a picture and send it to the owner of the restaurant. In a group chat with everyone in it, everyone was scared, pulling me aside and whispering about, be careful, because with this look in their eyes like they saw a ghost, Final Straw was getting attacked with awful remarks from a guy leaving when I told him to enjoy his meal and have a nice night. Then my coworkers were so escort, they looked at me like, so what? Not a big deal, just keep working. I was already feeling the pressure and stress, so I wasn't about to live in fear optionally. I was only there for like 2.5 weeks. Story 37, second day. Firstly, the first day I worked there, the owner was cold and rude. She yelled at me in front of a customer just for being polite and friendly towards him. He was having a fun day out with his disabled child. I just told him how sweet I thought that was and hoped he had a good time. Told him these memories mean a lot. The establishment was filthy. She touched ice cream barehanded and gave it to a customer. Dropped a spoon on the dirty ass ground. She didn't wash it. She also wanted to pay me under minimum wage. I got a second job I was planning to go to after the first one, and this lady demanded I choose because she wouldn't allow me to do both. The second job, I got to work with kids. I had flexible hours. My boss was warm and kind, and she paid me over minimum wage. I handed the first lady her uniform back and walked out without saying another word. Story 38. Worked at 24HR Fitness when I was 17. Wanted to go skiing for a week and was told no, it was impossible to schedule. Just walked out. Manager was fuming, yelling about marking me as a no rehire or some bullcrap. I found a job at Ella Fitness down the street that paid more after my ski trip. Good times. Story 39. 3 weeks. I was hired by a small organic grocery store to be a front-end manager. I ended up being made a cashier. The owner was a drunk who liked to do tequila shots at the nearby Mexican restaurant while he wrote the schedule. Then he'd stagger back and try to talk to the 2 or 3 customers we had. By the time I left, everything in the store was marked down at least 60%. I saw the ship was sinking and left before I was caught without a job. The most hilarious thing that happened was when the store got its menu board for the little cafe they tried to set up. Espresso was spelled espresso. The owner was pissed. Apparently that sign had cost him a couple grand. Funniest crap I've ever seen. I even got to be the one to point it out to him. Story 40, worked at Sonic for 3 hours. They made us wear skates, and I fell and hit my ass and quit immediately. I was a teenager and thought I'd master skating day 1. Story 41, I quit a job by first break on day 1 once. Crafty little plastic goods factory that made emergency sleds and whatnot. Think enclosed gurney you tow behind a snowmobile. Boss brought me to the guy I'd be working with, told him to show me the ropes. He took one look at me, put both his headphones in, then didn't say a word to me even once. When break time came around, I got fed up, grabbed my stuff, said goodbye to the one guy in the back who was nice to me for those 2 hours, then punched out and left. Felt good, man. The runner-up was this styrofoam block factory that cut foam chunks for the purposes of use in concrete forming. All we did was cut giant blocks of styrofoam with a hot wire breathing nice toxic gas in all day. Quit that crap after day 1. A week or 2 later, I got a job sandblasting mining equipment parts. Story 42. Never technically had it, but I shadowed a guy for a whole day, so I feel like I worked there at least that long. First red flag, sales team has to do a hype-up chant to start the day before they go sell office supply subscriptions to local business. Dude spends the whole time telling me how rich he is, while we are hoofing it down Main Street trying to sell paper to aquarium shops and law offices, etc. Third red flag. He got mad at the aquarium guy for not re-upping on office supplies. He's still trying to tell me how rich he is. While we get $5 footlongs at Subway, I've long since decided his alligator shoes are fake, and he's so full of crap the sub barely had anywhere to go. Finally get back to the office for the final interview sign-on. It's Thursday evening at this point, and I say I can start on Monday because I'm going out of town to help my friend move to another city. Interview lady says not wanting to start Friday morning is a sign that I'm not a good fit, which she was hoping would get me to fall in line. And I go, yeah, you're right, and leave. Turns out it was a crafty pyramid scheme company. Bullet dodged. Story 43. 2 days. It was a front desk job at a hotel, and the first I got after taking a few-month break to grieve my father's passing. I was hired on immediately, like halfway during the interview it changed from interview to when you come in. First day was okay, but then I learned that there were zero benefits, no health, no PTO, nothing. Not even management got it. This was a chain hotel too. Second day was incredibly stressful with several guests coming to complain in an hour span because the person on the desk switched the rooms they initially booked and put them in ones they didn't want. Like giving them a room with a single king when they wanted 2 queens, put them in rooms that didn't have connections to other rooms when they had kids to care for, despite booking that room specifically, etc. And oh, the complaints about the construction, which I get wasn't something Fadi could fix, but still, just way too much at once. Anyway, went home and was like, nah, absolutely not worth it, and got on with another hotel that I enjoy so much more. Story 44. A few days. I was hired to be a framer for an art print store at the mall. I thought it was framing them in the back stockroom. Turned out to be the owner's garage at his house. I was newly married in my early 20s. The garage was all set up like a framing shop but had no central heat or air. It was so cold I could not feel my rear. He was not happy that me and the other worker needed in his house to use the restroom. She was about my age and supposed to train me. Come to find out she was his girlfriend. He was expecting me to learn how he wanted the frames done. Then he was firing her and breaking up all at the same time, only he didn't tell her that. I did, then left. I don't think it was a legal setup in any way. And it appeared he was preying on his college student female workers. I later found out he was paying less than half what framers are supposed to make. Story 45. Call center for a propane company. Was told it would pretty much be scheduling propane fill-ups and was trained as such. Sadly, we would not sell propane accessories or propane products. Training was 2 weeks. Nope, it was a lie. Turns out, the night shift was Poorman's 911 for gas emergencies. For some ducking reason, when smelling leaking gas, people called their gas company instead of local emergency services. And emergency services would call us too. The first night I had to wake up a district manager to tell him one of his drivers drove off the edge of an icy road and died. Oh, and County Hazmat was on the other line, so could he do something? I had no backup, no supervisors on the floor to ask what to do, so I muddled through the best I could. I made it 4 days, took a sick day on the 5th, and never came back. Duck that. Story 46. 2 shifts. I got a job at EB Games in the mall, and I thought it would be my dream job. Selling games all day, talking with geeks, getting a fat discount. What's not to like? First shift, I found out their POS system was some command line gibberish out of the 80s. Every time there was an error, you had to phone a support center to get help. I got max 30 minutes training on it and was put on the tills. Then, my trainer went for lunch and I was alone in the store on my first shift. Every single counter drawer was mislabeled, so the only way to find things was to A, know where it was from experience, or B, ask someone. After my second time asking someone, I got a talking to about bothering people. The back was a tiny room where people literally threw things onto a pile. I wouldn't have been surprised to find Cines games at the bottom. When someone wanted something we couldn't find, we'd go look in the back, which meant sit down and check our phones for 5 minutes. After my second shift, I quit and went back to my old job. I assume that the problem eventually came to a head because about 6 months later, the location shut down for a renovation, and literally every physical item was inventoried, sorted, and all the drawers were properly labeled. Story 47. It took me roughly 2 months. I was the housekeeper for the local senior center, meaning that I had a weekly schedule of which elderly person's home I'd go clean on individual days. I was there maybe a month when one of the men had to be hospitalized for a major health problem. My best guess is a heart attack, but OFC nobody ever told me. So his wife had their son move in from next door because she was afraid of living alone while her husband was in the hospital. Their son wasn't receiving the senior center's services despite being old enough to quality, mid-60s-ish. I wasn't allowed to clean spaces used only by people who were not receiving services. I apologized to the lady, explaining to her that because he's not on my list, I'm not allowed to clean the spare bedroom while he's using it. She goes and calls the guy at the top of the ladder to report this. He says, she's right actually. And after that, this lady hyper-analyzed my every move. Between her and the lady who swore I wasn't cleaning well enough if her bathrooms didn't reek of bleach, and tried to demand I dig the hair out of her shower drains, not part of my job. My supervisor actually had to go explain that one in person. I didn't stay much longer. Story 48. I didn't even go to my first shift. I had just moved to a new town and didn't have a job. My most recent work was at a restaurant, like pizza/salad sandwiches. It was brand new and I was in high school, so I started as a dishwasher. A few months later, I moved up to a cook. Super easy, not like a line cook. I was looking for restaurant jobs and I found this spot that is a big late night destination due to its close proximity to all the bars, College Town, I applied online for a dishwasher job and they called me in for an interview. I wore a shirt and tie, and the first thing the owner said was making fun of the fact that I wore a shirt and tie. He did call me back because he wanted to hire me, but said I had to work a couple shifts as tryouts before he actually hired me. I was supposed to go in, but I got offered a job at a grocery store where two of my roommates worked. I called the restaurant guy and told him I wasn't coming in and got a new job. He backpedaled on the whole tryout thing, but I didn't give a crap at that point. Story 49, 4 hours. Took a job working as a computer operator at a casino only to be told after orientation that I would be working a split shift twice a day, every holiday, and every weekend. I went home, called back, and quit. They threw a fit and asked who would cover that weekend as they all had vacation, and I said, I didn't know because I didn't work there anymore. Years later, someone I worked with at another job and who had worked at the casino found out I had worked there and said, "You're the guy? They hate you there." Story 50. When I was in college, I got hired at a popular company that sells knives. I worked the first day / orientation and quit immediately after lunch, as I realized it was rather sketch. You only got paid when you sold, and it was dependent on you selling first to family and friends by going to their homes and then asking them for referrals. Story 51. A month was my quickest. Got a job at a flower growth plant in middle of winter. Took an hour to drive to the place on bad roads with everything covered in ice and snow, and once there, everything was kept cold. It was in fact colder inside than outside, including the break room. The actual growth room was heated, but we rarely went in there. They also gave us no protection gloves or clothes, so you constantly had irritated and cut fingers in freezing temperatures while working a 14-hour shift all on your feet. It also didn't help that most of our flowers were deemed ugly and thus were to be thrown out. This was apparently normal. After a month, I quit because I was sick, exhausted, and wounded. Oh, and I almost forgot. We worked in shifts, 7 days working, then 2 days off. The pay was pretty good, but I would rather swallow my knife than to do that again. Story 52. 1 day of training. It wasn't a bad job, serving old folks in a retirement community, but I asked for the schedule to see when I worked next, and the boss chuckled knowingly. "That's not how we do it here, son." He explained that he would give me a call when I was needed, and I would need to be to work half an hour after the call. So no regular shifts, just whenever. I can't do that. I'm working 2 other jobs. I would need to schedule around those other jobs or change my schedule there to fit around this job. "I'm sorry, but I can't work for you." He said he understood and was sorry I couldn't be more flexible. We parted amicably, though I was flummoxed about how that man could possibly run a place with that method of staffing. 3 weeks later, he called me at 5 a.m. to see if I could work the breakfast shift. I was less friendly as I reminded him I had quit. I was a little surly at my other jobs that day. Story 53. I was a part-timer in the fact that I could work 39.5 hours, but the ACA made the new full-time 30 hours, so my job had to cut me to 29.5 hours a week because they didn't want to make me full-time. I had just got married, so I needed the money and took a second job at Target for unloading the truck. I was also going to school full-time. I had to be at Target at 5 a.m. and worked until 10 a.m. and then worked at my main job from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. I did my homework in between and at night. On the second week, I overslept 2 days in a row, and on the second day, I claimed I was sick. It was the day off the next day, so I went in and thanked them for the opportunity, but told them I just couldn't do it reliably. I actually liked Target. They were nice, but the hours were just too tough. I got another job where it was 7 a.m. to 12 p.m., but it was the worst job I ever had. I stayed there because I needed the gig until my first job finally made me full-time. Story 54. While I was studying to be a nurse, I worked as a nursing assistant. I got employed by this aged care facility. This wasn't my first job in this role, and I was almost finished nursing, so I had experience and knowledge. The conditions were absolutely horrific. They had a woman lying in her urine constantly, only changing the pad twice a day. She had developed a fungal infection, and they were only treating it with steroids for the redness and not the actual fungal infection. There was 2-person assist we were doing with a resident, and she had to hold on to bars to help stand herself up, and it had wheels to move her. I assessed she didn't have the strength and refused to do it. The other aide did it by herself, and the woman got a skin tear from not being able to hold herself up. There was a woman there with a broken wrist from being dressed that morning. There's a heap of other stuff that happened on that one shift, but holy crap. I've never quit after one shift and reported at a facility so fast. Story 55. Technically it was a week, but I only actually worked for 2 hours. I was getting something out of the attic of the building, business swag, and handing the box down to a person who was showing me the ropes, and I fell off the ladder. I think my pants got caught on my heel. This was the early 90s, and I literally plummeted down. My knee swole up crazy fast, and I went to the ER. Couldn't walk, but nothing was broken. Just an enormous amount of fluid. Ended up telling them after a week that I probably can't come back. Wasn't a big deal because I still lived at home with my parents at the time, Ended up with a new job when I was able to walk again. I got paid for the week. Story 56. About 2 days, the first I was weirded out because I was happy that the hiring manager called and had me come in, but he wasn't there, as his wife was giving birth. Yay, cool, wow. I shadowed and got my hourly. The next day, he swung by for about 15 minutes to set up his personal laptop, log into some state sites, and asked me to run my own background check and schedule my own substances test. I mean, I understand his predicament, but I wasn't ready and I'm pretty sure it's not lawful. I shut his laptop down and left. He called a week later to check in, and apparently the other manager never checked in to see if I was settling into my position and told him I was great. I told him I left and congrats, and he was so apologetic. Poor dude, kind of a scrambled egg, but I don't blame him. Story 57. A few weeks after, at a retail job, hired for holiday work. They offered to keep me on after the holiday. I said okay, but I will need a week in January off because I'm visiting a friend. Already had plane tickets. They said okay, and then put me on the schedule anyways. Screw that. Story 58. I got a job at a local coffee shop and the staff didn't talk to each other, hardly at all. The register was an old one, with every key, like 50 at least, labeled with an item. It didn't automatically calculate change, and I was using Canadian coin. I'm American. I was so overwhelmed after one 2-hour training shift that I just told the owner I wasn't going to come back for the next one. Story 59. An hour maybe, I sat in on their staff meeting before I had even started on the schedule. I'm a massage therapist and found out I would only be paid for the minutes of service, not any add-ons. So, a 60-min deep tissue with cupping paid me the same as 60-min Swedish or body treatment. No incentive to sell their add-ons. They, of course, expect of you. Told them I made hundreds per check selling add-on at the place I already worked. Therefore, not worth leaving, and they offered me 10% on the $1.50 story. 60. 6 hours? I got a job as a dishwasher at a restaurant, and nobody really trained me at all on how they wanted it done there or any specifics. I was working my ass off, and eventually everyone had left but me, because I was still working. I don't recall anyone offering to wait till I was done, since it was my first day and I didn't have the alarm code, etc. I finished up, took out the trash, shut off the light, and just left out the back door. I lived almost an hour away at the time, and it was about 11 p.m. when I got done. I called out of my shift the following day and said I wouldn't be back. Story 61. It was maybe 4 weeks in when I quit or was quietly fired. I worked at a small pharmacy. Think of CVS on a much smaller scale. They trained me on the register, how to manage and stock the store, accept deliveries, and fill prescriptions in about 2 total 4-hour shifts. So I was 18 years old, and they barely trained me. On my first shift after training, the pharmacists went on their lunch break for an hour. No one else was working the pharmacy. I was behind the front register, and the owner of the place said they were running next door to grab Duncan. She disappeared for 45 minutes. I was running the place by myself. This happened a half dozen more times over the course of the next few weeks, and I didn't know how the heck to manage half the stuff that was going on. I figured I'd quit. Then I got my next schedule, and where I was working 3-4 days per week on 4 or 8-hour shifts, I suddenly had only one shift with no explanation. So I quit. Story 62. Albertsons was hired as an overnight stocker. Did the orientation at some other store and was told to go back to the store. I was hired for after. To turn on some papers and talk to a manager for scheduling. Did that, manager wasn't there, and was told to call the next morning. Called next morning, and manager wasn't there and was told she was off until the following Monday or whatever, and was told to call then. The next day I get a call from them saying I was scheduled at 10 a.m. and was wondering if I was going to come in so they can train me in the gas station to run the registers. I never applied for that and had no intention to do that. And also, no one ever notified of any schedule. I didn't even try with that place after that. Store closed down less than a year later. Story 63. McDonald's third shift. I was already working at a daytime warehouse job and just had a kid, so I needed the extra income from a second job. I was at the point that I was willing to take anything. I went through all the processes of getting hired and getting my uniform and was given my first schedule. At the time, me and my GF only had one car, and I was OFC letting her keep it, so I couldn't just walk out and leave. I remember it being dead, but taking a couple orders and just thinking to myself, there was no way I was going to make it, nor did I care to try. I went to the bathroom and called my GF and told her to come get me, and because I had to do it that way, I felt like I had to tell the managers that I was going to leave. I worked for all of an hour and a half. Story 64. Did 1 12-hour shift at a printing press. They weren't going to give us breaks, like any breaks. Me and this other dude were temps, first time we ever worked there. The lady at the temp agency begged me to do a week over there. 12 hours, just picking up printed magazines off a press and putting them on pallets. They basically had this attitude of, if the press doesn't break down or misprint, we don't take breaks, lunch, nothing. Also, for the level of work, it was crafty pay. Right after the shift, I called and said no, I'm not doing another shift, and asked if they knew they were pressuring temps to break labor laws. She sheepishly admitted it was a constant problem with them. Story 65. I quit before I even started. Typical New England fried clam stand opening for the summer. Not only was it 3 ducking interviews for a minimum wage cashier job, I was given one start date only to eventually get an angry email from one owner asking why I never showed up. So it was a husband and wife team who owned the stand, but they apparently weren't good with communicating. The wife hired me and gave me a start date for 2 weeks. The husband emailed me from a separate email than the one I'd been in communication with, which went to my spam folder, and just assumed I got it instead of, calling me. I just called him and left a voicemail, basically saying that if he and his wife couldn't communicate, I didn't want to be put in that kind of environment. Story 66. I'll tell you about the one I should have quit. I arrived on my first day and the office was all abuzz because the accountant office manager hadn't showed up for work. So the owner's son got a hunch and looked at the latest published mugshots from the local PD, and she was in jail for drunk, disorderly. The boss sent him to bail her out and bring her to work. As soon as she arrived, there was a massive shouting match between her and the boss, complete with slamming doors and profanity. Later in the day, the son's ex-girlfriend showed up, heavily pregnant. I was informed that he was maintaining a friendly relationship with her until the paternity test, which would reveal which of 3 men was the father. I was on the verge of homelessness, so I stayed. I shouldn't have. Story 67. I worked for a furniture renting company for people with horrible credit. I was the delivery driver and had to inspect the truck to make sure it passed DOT regulation. This was my first day at a new store, and their truck failed with 4 infractions. One was that the dipstick had 0 oil on it. I told them I wouldn't drive the truck, and the manager tried her best to pressure me into it. I told her that I didn't feel safe working for someone so willing to put myself and others in harm's way, and just walked out. Story 68. 3 hours. I got a job with an after-school program. I had earned a teaching credential and couldn't find a job. It was 2008, so I got a job with an after-school program at a local middle school. Showed up, was taken to the area and met with the team leader, who told me my job was to make sure they did their homework, but that we couldn't make them or threaten consequences if they didn't listen. If they were disruptive, talked back, yelled, etc., we were just to stand there and do our best to support the other kids. Walk in, and it's a madhouse. First words spoken to me are, "Who is this fat cracker?" And right then I knew I was done. I'm not putting up with that, and since I cannot threaten consequences or anything, I knew I was going to leave. Spent the rest of my shift ignoring the coworkers and kids and never came back. Story 69. Like 3 months. Every time my boss gave me my paycheck, he would not let go of it until I snapped it out of his hand. Sometimes he would even pull back like he was taking it back. He would only do that to me. I found it boring and unamusing. Story 70. They texted me on what was apparently my first working day that I had to come to work. We never discussed when my first day would be and agreed before I would contact them within a week when I can start. When I received the text message after waking up at noon, I called them, told them I quit with immediate effect, and done. Technically 3 hours into my first shift. Employees of Reddit who have witnessed a great I quit moment. How'd it goes? 3 months after I began working at a restaurant, a girl on the floor had a walkout. The policy of our restaurant was that the server had to pay for the walkout, no matter whose fault it was, and this girl was beside herself. It was a $60 check on a slow night, and she simply did not have the money to cover it. So our floor manager did the decent thing and used his free meal. Managers were comped a meal each day they were scheduled, since they tended to work 12-hour days, to comp her table so that he didn't have to write her up for a walkout. Well, the lady who walked out apparently realized it the next day and sent the corporate headquarters a letter apologizing for the walkout, along with a check for roughly the amount the dinner cost, tip included. When corporate went to pay the tab, the only similarly priced item they found was the dinner the manager had comped. So the VP walked into the restaurant at the start of a Friday evening shift and sat down in one of our sections to have a chat with him. The VP started to chastise him for comping the meal rather than making the server pay, and the manager told him it was a stupid policy. So the VP, who apparently was universally hated, stood up and snarled, "Well, if you think I'm so bad at my job, why don't you quit?" And the manager said, "Fine," stood up, tossed his keys into the VP's hands, and walked out of the restaurant. That shift was hell, without a floor manager that night. But it was worth it to watch him stand up to the VP like that. Story 2. I used to deliver pizzas for this place in North Dakota. One of the other drivers would constantly complain about the owner cutting his hours or scheduling him during a day when he had already requested off for weeks ahead of when the bi-weekly schedules were prepared. Our restaurant also had a pretty sizable pizza buffet. One night, the driver got back from a big delivery where the homeowners didn't tip because it took the driver too long to get there. The problem, though, was that the house was actually outside of our delivery range. In fact, the house was beyond the reach of the paved roads. The owner happened to see that these guys placed an online order, approved it in our system, messed around with the delivery queue so that the driver he disliked was the one to take it, and basically just screwed the guy over for no real reason. Driver got back, Karened about the delivery, and the owner told him to pack his crap up and leave if he didn't like it. The driver responded by grabbing a family-size style box, walked over to the buffet, hauled all 6 big-ass pizzas, and stacked them into the box, which wouldn't shut, headed for the door, paused, and then threw all 6 pizzas at the owner. Personally, I'd have kept the pizzas, but I can appreciate the emotions he was going through. Story 3, one from the other side. I caught an employee prepping an item without gloves on, dirty fingernails and all, just digging his bare hands right into it. I took the item away from him and dropped it in the trash as I explained everything he did wrong. He wasn't even supposed to be shredding the item in question while it was cold, as it leads to a mushy, substandard finished product. He looked at me, made an up-your-ass motion, said something in Spanish, then said, "Duck you, I quit." He came back at the end of the night begging for his job back because his wife was kicking him out. Sorry, I didn't even feel bad. Story 4. There was a period of time where I held 2 jobs, the secondary of which was a position at a local UPS store. I would bust ass and work 70+ hours a week fairly frequently. I learned quickly, and it wasn't long before I was one of the main workhorses behind the store. I did almost all of the custom packaging work, including crating and designing boxes for odd-shaped shipments of almost any size or weight. I also happened to have a background with computers and promptly became the main printing guy for the store. I literally handled print jobs for thousands of booklets for local schools on my own, including design. All of this to say I was a very important employee at this particular upstore. I told him when I started that this job was secondary to me and that I would leave when I started going back to college. When that time finally started coming around, I gave him notice that I would be leaving so he could find another employee or 2 to train for my position. I waited for 2 months so he would have time to find a replacement, and I never once saw him look for a new employee. My girlfriend and I had been planning a week-long trip to go see my family that I delayed so that I wouldn't leave my boss high and dry. I had intended to schedule the trip after I left and before school started, but my boss had procrastinated finding a replacement for me so long that I didn't much time to wait anymore. I finally told him that I would be leaving on a certain date that was nearly a month away so that I could schedule the trip before school started. He stood there silently for a moment, then blew up on me and chewed me out. The reason he was pissed? He was going to be out of the store for a few days, one of which was the day I was leaving. He said he had specifically told all of his employees not to even think about requesting time off during these days. He looked me in the eye and told me about how disappointed he was in me and told me how selfish I was. He went on chewing me out for a good 5 minutes. I was in total shock. I couldn't even muster up a proper verbal defense. I was so totally disgusted and angry and in a state of utter disbelief. I wanted to throttle the guy. So I said, "Duck it. I'm out." He stormed out before I could get my things together. I ended up sticking around for the last 4 hours of my shift so I wouldn't leave my coworker on his own during Christmas season in a shipping store. I got some sick satisfaction knowing that my boss would have to pay me for the remainder of my day there, even after I had told him I quit. He never technically told me to leave. I'm still angry about what happened to this day. I'm pretty sure he lost the rest of his staff shortly after I quit. Nobody liked him at all. Story 5, this is my dad's story. So a lawyer my dad knew that working for a major bank for some reason wasn't happy with his job and decided he was going to quit. Anyways, so he wrote his letter of resignation and was preparing to go hand it in to his boss. That day he got called down to his boss's office and thought, perfectly, I can quit now. He went into the office, but his boss kept insisting he say what he needed to first. So his boss sits him down and tells him they're letting him go, then asks what he wanted to tell him. He pulled out the letter of resignation, showed it to him and tore it in half. Now they're paying him 2 years compensation. Always let the other guy talk first. Could turn the tables. At some places, such as the major banks in Canada, they are required to give people a severance package if they are letting them go for reasons that are not due to the person's behavior, job budget cuts, and so on. It gives people a chance to get back on their feet and find another job so they aren't left without a steady source of income. I think if they choose to pursue new employment options, the severance is discontinued. I'm not sure if it is 2 years at all levels. I'm sure contracts differ between different levels. But in this scenario, I believe it was 2 years, story 6. I just put in my own 2-week notice this afternoon. I just could not handle working at that big box retail establishment anymore. I'm underappreciated and underpaid. Not only do I work as a cashier, but I also worked as a cart attendant, dodging cars in the parking lot while bringing in upwards of 25 carts. I've worked at the return desk, fighting the urge not to walk off right then and there, and customers who I swear tried to run me over while pushing in carts outside. I've also cleaned up and restocked the entire front end of the store, on my own I might add. Think 30 checkout lanes with bags, spider wraps, CD, DVD cases, baskets, and items that the customers didn't want to buy. I cleaned them all up on my own. I've also covered the breaks and lunches for the electronics department. Even though they make more money than me, I've had one manager pull me off the lanes and tell me to go outside and help push in carts because we were running low. On my way outside, dressed in a high-visibility vest, so I didn't get run over by a car, but was covered in enough dirt to be less than highly visibly, another manager would tell me, excellent that you're inside from pushing in carts. I hadn't actually gone outside at this point, and we were down to 1-2 carts at best. And that manager would tell me to go to the customer service desk as they were getting backed up with customers. And before I could tell that person that I couldn't, as I needed to bring in carts, no carts, it was customers, no buying items, they'd walk off. And then immediately after that, yet another manager would see me standing there and tell me, "Great, you're back from your break. Go on a lane and back us up. We've got a large crowd coming down." I hadn't been on my break yet at this point. 3 different managers would tell me to be in 3 different places. I've covered the front lane supervisors as well when they needed to step away. Times I would be stuck on a lane. I'm just a lowly cashier, remember? And the lights on our lanes would be lit up like a Christmas tree. The system of sending prompts to our supervisors when we need things like change or help doesn't really work that well. And our exempt managers would just stand around while we were getting backed up like crazy and had to calm angry customers down. After working at that place, I can understand the concept of fragging certain higher-ups in the military. I don't condone it, but I can understand why someone would do it. You are a useless human being and are costing us money. We need to make you go away. I was really tempted to write down on my 2-week notice form under reason for leaving, know what the difference is between me and every overpaid and underworked manager in this store. People here will genuinely give a damn after I'm dead, but I didn't, because the people in the HR department don't need that kind of BS to deal with. I honestly can't remember the names of all my department's managers that have come and gone. At times, I effectively was doing the work of 3 to maybe 8 people, I would estimate. I've also been passed up for promotion for front lane supervisor as well. The manager who interviewed me stated I was too nervous in my interview. I put interview in quotes because he didn't actually interview me. He just found another person to interview me. The person they actually gave that job to ended up transferring to another store within 3 months anyways. Story 7. Here's the story of how I quit delivering from Papa John's about 10 to 12 years ago. I gave notice and left on good terms, but had to leave my mark. At this particular store, they had a tradition of tarring and feathering people as they left if they were well-liked, using garlic sauce and Dustinator, the powdery stuff they roll the dough in to make it not sticky. For 2 weeks, I contended with "it's coming" and threats and jibes. Then, the moment came. 20 or 30 employees came to see me off, including all 3 of the store managers. The general manager gave the order, and the chase began. I ran out the back door toward the dumpster, 5 or 6 of them chasing right behind me. Then, I gave the order. "Now!" I yelled. 3 friends in full black tactical gear stepped out from the woods behind the store, flanking the parking lot. They immediately opened fire with paintball guns. For 3 nights beforehand, we had been out there practicing the move. The entire event was planned and choreographed perfectly. We didn't know exactly when the order to start the hazing would happen, so they sat out there in the woods for about 3 hours waiting. When the moment came, the worked in perfect concert, like a ducking clock. I ran to the dumpster and grabbed the paintball gun I had stashed the night before, then sighted in on the manager that gave the get him order. I lit him up. 5, 10, 15 shots. Who knows? The manger then managed to get the paintball gun away from me and used me as a human shield as my a-hole friends turned on me and unloaded the rest of their hoppers on me. All in all, everybody involved had a great time, and nobody was at all upset. As an interesting side note, I ordered a pizza from there a few weeks ago. I asked the girl if manager still worked there. He did. I told her to tell him that my nickname when I worked there said hi. She immediately said, "Holy crap, your nickname? You were the one with the paintball guns, right?" They still tell stories about it 10 plus years later. I'm aware that this was dangerous. We were gated that didn't think things through. In hindsight, somebody could have been hurt, but nobody was. Story 8. So up until about a year ago, I worked for a local power company as an IT contractor. I worked my ass off for 5 years and was managing 10 contractors around the state and pretty much did the work of 3 people. When my manager, who was an employee of the company, not a contractor, announced her retirement, she told me she wanted me to be her replacement. So I submitted my resume, told my wife, and got really excited. Weeks go by. I keep asking my manager what was going on, but she wasn't really sure. Then one day she comes into my work area with a bummed out look on her face. Turns out that her boss decided that since I wasn't a real employee, I couldn't apply until after they had considered internal candidates. In the end, they ended up giving a manager from another department the job without me even getting an interview. The guy that gave it to was a real schmuck who didn't know the first thing about what we did. The worst part was that since the announcement wasn't official yet, I couldn't tell anyone until the next day. I was furious. Then I cried. Then I got mad again. Got online, looked at local job postings, found one that looked great, sent my resume without any real hope of getting it. I literally got a call from the guy in about an hour and he set up an interview. I went in the next morning for the interview, just told my manger I had a personal issue and would be in late. The first time I'd ever called into that job. And it went great. They made me an offer that afternoon which came out to about a 40% increase from what I was making before, with actual benefits, an amazing retirement plan, and about double the PTO. The greatest feeling in the world was when that stupid schmucky a hole came over to our area for the announcement. Everyone was in shock because I was the obvious choice for her replacement. He turned to me and was like, "I'm gonna count on you to help me get up to speed," with this big grin on his face. I just smiled and said, "Yeah, that's not gonna happen. I start my new job the same day you do." He laughed like I was joking, but I didn't laugh with him. It took a moment for it to sink in, and the look of absolute panic on his face was the sweetest thing I've seen in a long time. He spent the rest of his day sitting in his cube with a sick-to-his-stomach look on his face. I felt bad about leaving my employees. They were a great crew under the new manager. But I love my new job, so I don't regret my decision. Story 9. When I was a teenager, I worked at a local coffee shop, which I thought was a pretty cool job, until the owner turned out to be a massive, festering, seething a hole. She treated all her employees like crap and kept threatening to make us turn over our tips to her at the end of the shift to dole out as she saw fit. She also once refused to close or stop roasting coffee in the summer when the air conditioner broke and it was over 100 degrees in the store. And she wouldn't let us have ice, even to put in our water, because she said we had to pay for ice. Anyway, most of the time she wasn't there, so me and my coworkers would just try to laugh about how absurd it was. And we were all planning on quitting at the end of summer anyway. So it was the end of July, and my grandma ended up in the hospital with some really serious problems in the middle of the night. My mom woke me up early the next day to bring me to the hospital because they didn't think she'd make it. I was supposed to work an opening shift, so I called my boss about 40 times and texted and left messages at her house, her cell, and the shop. She always came in the morning to open with us anyway, so I didn't worry too much. Well, I don't know what happened, but she left a screaming, ranting voicemail on my phone, yelling that I can't just not show up for work. And she bet that I had been skipping my shifts the whole time, and she was going to check the security cameras, and that she was going to sue me, a 16-year-old, for the amount of money she'd lost by not opening on time that morning. I was like, okay, not going to go back to work there anymore. She kept leaving me voicemails for a week and sending angry, ranting emails, including some from someone who was supposedly a lawyer. I had been afraid to show my mom because I thought she'd be mad at me, but I finally showed her and she flipped out. My mom's a super mild-mannered, quiet, polished lady, and she just lost it and went into my job and started screaming at my boss that I was quitting, that the boss was a stupid piece of crap who abused teenagers, and that my mom would report her, that she was a mean old fat duck, and just all these other insults I'd never imagined my mom using. It was really amazing. There were lots of customers there and other employees. Then my mom called the town's business bureau or whatever and filed a complaint. And then we went home and she told me to never, ever, ever take that kind of crap from people. My grandma is fine now, BTW. Story 10. I've got 2 moments to share about quitting. The first, I was working the 3rd shift as a line cook at Steak and Shake. I had set out there were 2 nights a month I could not work due to other obligations. What those are don't matter. It was something I discussed during my interview and said I wouldn't accept the job if those 2 days weren't given. Simple request for the one hobby, LARPing, I have that's on a schedule. One day I developed terrible diarrhea. Now I was Serve Safe certified at the time, so I wasn't about to go into work sick and just spread it. I called my boss to call off and he starts ranting about my demand for my 2 days off a month, follows up, "And now you're calling off?" He's going on and on. I tell him to shut up. Fine, I'll come in, but he better make sure the TP is fully stocked. Took my shiny new iDigital iCamera and took pictures and video detailing the condition I was in and that I was handling food. The GM came in the next morning and goes, "We need to talk." Mentally, I go in character where I'm used to being an a-hole with people shouting at me. I told him, "No, you can save your bribes," to which he looked really confused and started spluttering, big fat ass turning bright red in the middle of breakfast rush. I went on, not bothering to keep my voice down. "I told you I had terrible diarrhea. Spent most of the night in the restroom there, and you had me handling food all night and morning. When I get home, I'm reporting you to the Board of Health." He shouts, "Who the duck do you think you are?" I just smile and say, "I'm deprecated 0, and I'm not your servant. Who do you think you are?" Cresting 50 with a dazzling career in fast food. Dude was quivering, like someone poked a giant red Jell-O mold. As I walked away, he's shouting, "You're fired, don't come back." Went home and called the BOH, I don't know whatever it came of, if anything. I've held on to that memory to encourage me. When I was in college, it was what motivated me to go for AS and Excel. The other one I enjoyed was much more recent. I was laid off last year with 3 weeks' notice, severance, the whole deal. I was happy for this because the severance was sufficient that I could take the time to look for an amazing job. I have 7 years of experience doing technical support and could land a tech job quick and easy, so I wasn't worried about all that. To summarize what was awesome about this, they kept offering me new tech support jobs at the company. I told them that the only way they'd get me to stay doing tech support was by paying me $75K a year. When that never panned out, I smugly wished everyone except the new director who had gunned to get my team fired a good future. The new director just gave me the hairy eyeball as I smiled at him. Story 11. I had worked as a cable internet installer. I was originally hired specifically for computer skills since back in those days most computers didn't come with network cards, and installing one would often lead to problems. This was when Windows 98 and me were dominant. And to make matters worse, a lot of customers had IBM captives. So they'd been having trouble teaching cable guys to be computer nerds and started hiring computer nerds instead and teaching them how to do cable. So I liked my job at first. I was only given calls that involved internet. The company paid for the vehicle, the gas, the uniform, everything. They were a great company. Then the owner sold it to the rival cable company on the other side of town. Most people, as customers, hated those guys. I had too. Before I started the job, I knew I didn't want to apply there. And now I was working there anyway. They forced us to buy vans to keep our jobs. They offered used ones from the fleet, with whatever issues noted on them. I picked out one that claimed to only have a couple of minor issues. Ducking thing turned out to have so much wrong with it, it was nickel and diming me to death. This company also didn't pay hourly, or any overtime. It was all unit-based, so you'd get X amount of money for a specific activity. Then they started sending us internet guys to regular calls, where you'd only have crap work to do, the stuff that paid the least but often took the most time. I could make $60 in an hour doing an internet call. One of these others, I might take 2 hours to get $15. Back when it was the original company, paid hourly. It was no problem to get on the radio and say, "Hey, I've got a really tough wire to do here. Is there anybody in the area that can come help?" And sure enough, you could get some help. You both make the same money either way. But with this unit-based crap, who wants to split $15 from a crap job? Anyhow, the van kept breaking down. I spent a lot of money keeping it going, and finally one day I'd had enough. It was about the 10th hour of the workday for me. I still had 3 calls left, and the starter in the van died. I got on the radio and told the dispatcher, and every installer in the city could hear this too, that somebody better pick up these calls because I've had it. I quit. I'm going home now. The dispatcher asked if I could maybe take a cab to the office, borrow a van, and finish those calls. My anger shifted into rage. I asked him, "Do you not know what the word quit means, you ducktard? I'm done. Do the ducking calls yourself." Then I called a tow truck, went home, and that was that. They showed up at my house a couple of days later to collect some equipment I had, fair enough, and they also wanted me to fill out a thing explaining why I was leaving. I can't remember exactly what I wrote, but it was nasty, and that later resulted in a phone call to check my mental state in case I might show up with weapons or something. Story 12. I interned for a lawyer for 2 weeks when I was 19. During the 2 weeks, he was very verbally abusive, calling me an idiot, worthless, and so on. One night, he gives me the task of making his mother a card for Mother's Day. He supplied me with the pictures he wanted me to use for the card and what he wanted it to say. I took full advantage of the situation by making a card with his mother's picture attached to a word bubble that read, "Duck you Gary, I quit." Story 13. I was working as a waitress at a sports bar with like a gazillion draft beers. It was out in the boonies. This place was probably 10,000 scuffed with a really open floor plan. Management was mostly cool. The other servers were catty and lazy. There was this one manager that was just a turd-ass Karen. If I rang in a drink for her to make, she would roll her eyes and grunt loud enough for me to hear her across the restaurant. So after 8 months of putting up with some high school clique crap out of the other servers and this one of a manager, I decided to go back to school and move to the city. I found a new job, found a new place to live, and put in my notice at the sports bar. On my second to last day, I was working a Saturday lunch. I'm a crap manager is powerfully hungover and in a terrible ducking mood. 2 of the other servers were too hungover to come in, so we had half of the staff we needed. The one other server on shift was the ringleader of the clique. Insufferable Karen. Anyway, I'm a crap manager is already on my last nerve, and ringleader Karen is being the same Karen. She always is. We see some minivans pull up in the parking lot. Then more, then more, then more. Little League baseball players and their families come streaming into the restaurant. Hundreds of tiny people in cleats and their screaming infant sisters and tiger moms. Everywhere. I looked at McCrap's scowl and ringleader Karen's face and decided to duck this crap. I'm out. I took my apron off, walked by the bar, flipping McCrap off. Her face was priceless. Story 14. It's not so much a great I quit moment, but how I got fired from Burger King when I was a kid was always just bizarre. So the night in question was my first night on Whopper Line. Whopper Line was like the big leagues at Burger King, and it turns out you don't know what busy is until you've worked the Whopper Line on the weekend. Halfway through the shift, and I've had enough. My abysmal work ethic at the time had enough, and I decided I was going to quit. So I slipped out the back door and went to my car. I was in my car for maybe 30 seconds when my conscience got the best of me, and I decided to head back in. As I made my way back in through the back door, the assistant manager was out back taking a smoke break. I kind of keep my head down and slink past her expecting to get yelled at, but she doesn't. So before I went back to the line, I went to the back storage room to just gather myself and take a 5-minute break. The back room had a camera in it, so to prevent them from seeing me sitting back there, I took a bag and covered it. 5 minutes later, I was back in my right mindset and finished the night out. I had a few days off before I went in to pick up my check on payday. While I'm there, the manager brings me into her office, points to a video monitor, and asks me to explain this, and shows me video of me covering up the camera. I explain things to her, tell her what happened as she yells at me and how big of a security issue it was. I apologize, thinking that's the end of it, when she informs me that we know about the cheesecake. At this point, I'm completely lost, and she goes on to tell me that they know that the case of cheesecake that went missing was me. That's when the assistant manager came in, talking about how she saw me walking back from me car with a really guilty look on my face the night the case of cheesecake went missing. I try to explain myself, but they don't listen, informing me that I've been terminated and I can go home. In my last act of defiance before leaving, I went and ordered a meal with a slice of cheesecake that ended up smeared all over the manager's car as I left. I was pissed they refused to listen to me. A few weeks later, I ran into a kid who worked there, and the hot gossip was how I stole a case of cheesecake. I insisted I was innocent, but he just laughed at me and gave me a knowing nod like, I don't have to explain myself. 12 years later, and I still think about who got away with the perfect crime and how I was framed. Story 15. I worked at Subway last year and had this coworker who did great work, always on time, did his chores, but my GM didn't like him because he would always outperform them on anything. They would mock him, tell him to go faster, and make things difficult in general. Until one day I heard from the back, you know what, Doreen? Duck you, duck this place, duck this customer, and duck this company. Then proceeded to throw the turkey bacon avocado sandwich at her and storm out. Story 16. Throwaway worked at a major insurance company. My manager was this brown-nosing little, think Pettigrew and Harry Potter, total power trip, but no backbone. Did whatever the higher-ups told him, but if you confronted him with a problem or something against what he was told, i.e., hey, time, I'm putting this on your desk now instead of at 4:30, then he would tattle on you to management for going against his authority. And then they would reprimand you, and he would sit there with this stupid, smug grin on his face. He was never able to stand up for himself or tell you why things needed to be done a certain way. He would just tell on you if he felt threatened or insulted. Anyway, my coworker and him don't get along. She was a good employee, did her work, but he didn't like that she would present different ways for things to get done. So he doesn't like her and starts double-checking her work and finds she documented something really insignificant incorrectly. Something like, I called this person at 8:30 a.m. when she really called them at 8:35 or something. Anyway, she gets fired for an integrity issue. This set everyone off because if you have an issue with how someone is working, a good manager would review that person's performance and work with them to improve, rather than go behind their back and look for a way to get rid of them. In a word, he was a coward. So the day after she gets fired, my coworker spent all day slowly bringing paperwork to the shredder. She didn't ever have a lot of personal stuff on her desk. I guess it looked like she was reorganizing her files. At the end of the day, she goes over to Tim's desk with a letter for him to approve. We had to submit hard copies of all denial letters to management for them to approve. It's in an envelope, so as he takes it, he goes, "Thanks, Deborah." She goes, "No, thank you, Tim." Turns around and walks straight out the door. In the envelope was her ID, company credit card, and a letter saying she emailed this to me later. It was awesome. Effectively, immediately, I am no longer a member of your team and no longer an employee of X company. Thanks to you, my work has gone from challenging and enjoyable to a bunch of petty bullcrap. I forwarded this letter to your manager as well as corporate HR, as well as a much more detailed statement of why you are an inept, immature, racist manager who is incapable of conducting business in a professional manner without your own personal agenda interfering and taking over. I refuse to continue to work in such a toxic environment. A few minutes later, he runs out to try and catch up with her, ends up falling down a flight of stairs, and gets quietly let go, asked to leave a few weeks later. I also no longer work for that company. Thank God. Story 17, worked at a restaurant. The lady that owned it was one of those cliche types. Tough but fair, no problems with that. Then she sold the business. She stayed on to kind of show him the ropes. He decided the most important thing to do now is to paint the dining area. So he hires some schmuck to do it that does not even cover anything. I get this panicked phone call one day before I'm supposed to reopen. He wants me to come and help clean. As soon as I get there, he says, "You understand I can't pay you overtime." Not a good sign. I need the money, so I say fine. I look around and everything is covered in drywall dust. The painter had patched and sanded and not covered a thing. Nothing. So everything is covered. Tables, chairs, floors, dishes, appliances. You get the idea. I spent the day until 1 a.m. washing everything. Not a thank you. At 1 o'clock, I told him that if he wants me to open at 7 a.m., I need to go home and get some sleep. He gives me a hard time, starts to give me a guilt trip. The next day, I'm dragging my ass, still doing the job and getting the orders out there, but the customers could tell I was tired. I overhear him telling one of the customers how lazy I am. I was the only staff member he had left from the previous owner. So anyway, he was obviously deliberately saying this loud enough for me to hear. I walk up to him and say, out of earshot of the customers, restaurant owner, you can take this job and shove it, and you can consider this my 2 weeks' notice. He is not interviewing anyone for my job, so my previous boss asks why. He says, why should he? She reminds him that I quit, and he says, she wasn't serious, was she? She assures him I was. So on one of the last days I had left, maybe 2 or 3, it was payday, and everyone looks like they could spit nails. No one got paid. I didn't want to leave anyone in the lurch, so I stayed until it was just he and I on shift. I am closing, which is a lot of cleaning and preparing food for refrigeration and storage. I ask him for my check. He says he will give it to me at the end of my shift. I say, okay, then I want to see it. He refuses. I told him I don't work for anybody for nothing, so I storm out the back doors and walk home. I heard from the other staff that he had to call someone to come help him close. He owned the restaurant and he didn't have a clue how to do it. I guess they were there until midnight. A hole. Story 18. I haven't witnessed one, but I did one myself. I worked part-time at a sports authority when I was 18. I was the only person trained in the outdoors department this store had. One night we had a skeleton crew and I was in my normal spot at the fishing counter where all the expensive reels, paintball stuff, and airsoft stuff was. A lot of that stuff is easy to steal, so I spent most of my time over there making sure no one opened up boxes of paintballs or markers and stole them. The footwear manager came over to me. He was this Cambodian guy with yellow teeth, awful breath, and a heavy accident. He started laying into me about how a woman in footwear needed help picking out socks. I have no idea what made picking up the pack of socks and finding the size so difficult for this woman, but apparently she complained that no one was over there to help her. After I kept telling him that I knew nothing about footwear, socks, or the shoes over there, the manager started to take personal shots at me, saying I was lazy and always sitting behind the fishing counter because I didn't want to stand and do work. I basically ran the entire outdoors department. When I wasn't at the counter, I was in the back building bikes and then carrying them up to the top of the rack in the showroom area or sharpening Ski's snowboards. After I asked him if he was done talking, I took the quick detachable badge off, threw it at him, and said, I quit. It was an amazing feeling, and the look on his face was priceless. I had a full-time job, so it didn't bother me leaving that place. I got tons of calls from the store manager all the way up to the regional manager asking me to come back. Duck that place and duck retail. Story 19. I used to work at a restaurant in the kitchen. The sous chef was being a royal ass to this one guy on grill, like cussing him out, calling him useless, and other very unprofessional crap. So this guy takes the squirt bottle of brandy from the pan station and sprays the entire ducking grill. Then said, I quit, you're a hole. Yeah, Dustin was a good guy. Story 20. Years and years ago, I worked at a Taco Bell as a shift manager. I did a lot to keep that store running, as our current store manager didn't do a thing. The store manager would just no show on a day that we had to get our truck order in. She did this multiple times, and when she did, I always got the order in. I was never trained how, but I figured it out because it had to be done. It actually got to be a semi-regular thing. If the store manager didn't show up, one of the other shift managers would call me to come in and put in the order, even on my day off, because I was the only one who knew how to do it. That store manager actually got fired because I did the safe counts and managed to uncover that she was taking money from the safe, using it to buy substances, then selling the substances and putting back the cash. I did well enough at my store that I was transferred to another store to help them out because their store was struggling, due primarily to poor management. Boy, did the store manager not like that I was there to show them how to run their store. So she started pulling crap on me on a daily basis, scheduling me to close, then open the next morning, cutting my hours, anything she could think of. One day, I came in after having a day off, and she got in my face, demanding to know why I didn't show up to work the previous day. I told her that I had that day off. She said, "No, you didn't," and started waving the schedule on my face, with my name handwritten in. I told her that I'd checked the schedule before closing the store the night before, and it wasn't written in then, so it had to have been written in on the day I had off. And she didn't deny it. She just said, "It's your responsibility to know when you're supposed to work." I asked if I was expected to call in every morning on my days off to make sure I hadn't been randomly written in on the schedule, and she replied, "If that's what it takes." So I said, "You know what? I'm done." I quit and turned to walk out the door. She yelled after me, "Well, you're going to need to turn in your uniform." I stopped dead, turned around, stared her straight in the eye, took off my shirt, and threw it on the counter, keeping eye contact. I reached down and slowly started unbuttoning my pants. You can keep the pants. Story 21. I worked at a shop with my cousin. The boss was kind of a banana and would always be talking crap to the employees for no apparent reason aside from making himself feel better. The one morning, 8 a.m., we were all pushing a car into the shop, minus my cousin who was over by his toolbox. The boss says, "Get your crackhead cousin over here and help push." My cousin does not smoke crack. I believe the comment was maybe made because he's skinny. Anyways, he heard the crackhead comment but let it slide for the moment. By 8:30, the waiting room is full of customers waiting for repairs. My cousin proceeds to go to the first aid kit and takes all of the aspirin packets out. He smashes them into powder, opens them up, and spreads them on his lips so he looks like Tyrone Big Gum. He then proceeds to walk into the customer waiting area, where my boss is, and yells, "Come on, Larry, just let me get $5 before I fix this car, man. Come on, man. Help me out, just $5. How about $4? Come on, maybe 3 then? 3? My boss is visibly irritated and tells him to get the duck back into the shop and stop acting stupid. So he goes back into the shop for a few minutes. All of the mechanics, myself included, are laughing hysterically. The customers are in the waiting area with these crazy looks on their faces. He goes back into the waiting area when my boss is talking to a customer and does the same routine. "Just let me get like $1.50. Come on, man, the crack man up the block right now," he say, "if I bring him $1.50 and a wrench, he hook it up with a fat-ass rock, etc." My boss once again tells him to get the duck out. Now he's extremely pissed off. My boss comes back into the shop and starts yelling at him. Everybody is still laughing. He says, "That's it, you're fur." And before he could finish, my cousin says, "You can't fire me, I quit." And he spent the rest of his day removing his toolbox and such from the shop. It was totally worth it. The shop was extremely crafty. My boss treated the employees like total garbage, disrespecting everyone on a constant basis. He'd try and knock hours off of our paychecks all the time, never paid overtime. I gave the shop about 5 years from that point until it closed down. I was close. 6 years later, he's getting kicked out because he can't afford to pay the rent and whatever else. Either way, many S were had that day. Story 22. Not too special, but did it myself. Worked landscaping for a guy who was the kind of guy I would hang out with and work with, but not necessarily for if I had the chance again. He was cool until it came to work, and the foreman he had was a banana. The owner got pissed when myself and another guy called it a day after 5 hours of working in the pouring rain one day. We were alone on our job and did everything we could in the rain, then headed to the other crew's job to see if they needed help. No one there when we arrived. Texted them they had left an hour into the rain. We packed up and went home. I got crap for taking 2 days off I told him I needed when I was hired. The days my sister was visiting after returning from living overseas for 2 years. When I left was the best. Plans changed and my GF and I decided to move closer to my sister. May have helped that she lived in a ski town, meaning I wasn't going to finish the season with my boss. I gave him close to a month's notice, even though I was only required to give him a week. My second last week, I was turned into the Karen, doing crafty jobs, getting talked down to, etc. The owner was doing it as a joke at first, but then the foreman just dug in and started being a banana about it. The owner thought this was funny and joined in. My last day, I had to dig a ditch for an irrigation line 3 times by myself. Normally, there would have been at least 2 of us doing this. Or, in a case like that day where everyone else was doing meaningless jobs and it was a Friday, we all would have done it together to GTFO early. Owner kept saying, "That's what happens when you leave. You get the crap jobs." And every time I stopped for water or anything, "Get back to your ditch." That weekend, I drove the GF and most of our stuff to our new home 4.5 hours away and planned to return to work my last week. Duck that. Monday rolls around and I'm still with the GF. I ignore my phone until about 1 p.m. and then finally answer. "No, I'm not coming in for the rest of my time." "Yeah, well, that's what you get when you make me dig a ditch." Story 23. Okay, a bit of backstory is required. I recently worked at our local dollar store. Now, when I first got the job, everyone seemed really nice and it was a very small employee base. We had one manager who worked directly with us. I loved her to death. And we had 2 more that worked up front. Now, the store was not big and it wasn't the busiest store in the world. So our hours were not the most glorious, but we skated by with around 20 a week. Well, the manager starts cutting our hours and increasing his, so morale started to dip. I was a part of the freight crew, and we unloaded the truck and stocked everything to the shelf. Well, things started to go sour right around this time. Our hours got cut from about 20 to 10. Most people just dealt with it because they really needed the job and were having a hard time dealing with it. One worker, who was my favorite, so we shall call him KC, would always question the morals of our manager, and he was a real thinker. He always called him out on his beasts and things of that nature. Well, our manager cuts our hours down to 5 a week and told us we have to get 20 hours worth of work done a week, or he's going to stop giving us hours at all. KC was late this day and didn't get the fun lecture. Upon his arrival, he goes into the office to see his hours for the week cut down to 5. He immediately confronts the manager and tells him he needs more hours, to which our manager replied, "My hands are tied on this one." So this day happened to be a truck day, and it was a larger truck, about 3,000 piece. Casey went into the back and just started helping. The entire time, we can see him throwing his boxes and sliding them across the floor, obviously not caring much about his job. Fast forward 3 hours into the shift, the truck was finished. Casey calmly walked over to me and shook my hand. "I'm sorry, dude." Casey took off his shirt and threw it at the manager's office, making him come out. He then proceeds to yell at our manager, "I quit your fat duck." What followed next was probably the most intense Joker laugh I've ever heard. Casey walked out laughing like the Joker while playing metal from his phone. As he drove off, he stopped in front of the store and lit up a joint, blowing the smoke in the general direction of the store, looking as cool as can be. Story 24. My glasses snapped in half last night. I have to go into work in an hour and explain to my work that I will not be working today. I know they are going to try and convince me to stay. I always cover shifts and come in early, and they think I'm a pushover. When my glasses lost a half a lens, I continued to work, but my glasses can't even stay on my face anymore, and I'm pretty blind without them. 3.25275. It's also my girlfriend's birthday and Valentine's Day today. There's a good chance I quit in an hour. I didn't quit. I showed up early, got the work that only I could do done, and then left. I never clocked in, so could just walk out once I was done without getting signed out by the boss. We have to get manager approval to clock in or out when it's not our scheduled time. My direct supervisor understood, so I don't think I'll get in trouble. Story 25. I used to work in a grocery store as a bag boy. The grocery manager was a banana. He insulted a customer I was helping who happened to be a good friend of mine. The last day I worked there, I shook everyone's hands and told them thank for the experience, except him. He held his hand out to shake my hand. I said, "Duck you," and left. As I was leaving the parking lot, I flipped him off and told him to go to hell. He made working there suck. Story 26. So I was out canvassing for a home improvement company with my team, door-to-door advertisements trying to get people to sign up for a free estimate in the middle of the summer. Our team took one neighborhood, while the other team canvassed another. The team leader would go between areas, keeping an eye on us. After a while, I started getting the impression that a couple members of my group were getting exhausted from the heat. So I texted the manager asking for him to bring water that is kept in the company vehicle. He replied that he would be there in a few minutes. 15 minutes later, I texted him again, and he gave me the same response. Half an hour later, I texted him again, and he replied that it will be a while, as he is talking with a police officer. At this point, I was pretty sure that a couple of my team members were about to pass out from heat exhaustion. So I make the decision to round up my crew and drive them with my car to the nearest convenience store so we can all buy some water. We got there, bought the water, and went back to the neighborhood as quick as possible for fear I would get in trouble. Next day, every person that was in my car gets called into the director's office, basically the boss of our team leader. She promptly informs us that the vice president of the company watched us pull up to the convenience store and sit there on company time for about a half hour before leaving. I knew this was false as I left as quick as possible for fear of this situation in the first place. Without asking our side of the story, she immediately tells all 4 of us that we are fired. So again, looking out for my team, I interrupt and explain the story, and that decision was one that I alone made. She then thanked me for taking responsibility and that I will need to turn in my company shirt after washing it. It was summer, and walking through neighborhoods all afternoon, that thing got nasty, as I am terminated effective immediately. At this point, I'm pissed off, so I take the shirt off, throw it at her, and exclaim, "You wash it, I don't work for you," and stormed out. Story 27. A medically discharged Marine worked in the kitchen at my town's Dairy Queen with me, and our manager was a complete git. So one day, I walk into the kitchen to see "Duck You, I Quit" carved, yes, carved, with a knife, into the kitchen wall. The Marine then walked out of the back room with a bucket of ice and proceeded to dump it in the fryers. A massive fireball ensued. The automatic fire extinguisher went off, and we had to close the store for about 3 weeks while the kitchen got repaired and cleaned. Also, this was about a month after that particular store, which cost the better part of $2 million to build, opened. Story 28. Witnessed from a first-person view, I used to work nights in a popular donut franchise in an even more popular casino. After weeks of taking crap from my bosses, I called my roommate and asked him to pick me up as soon as he could, I proceeded to start a run of donuts, about 2K of them. As soon as I hit the no turning back point, I walked into the office, took off my shirt and apron, and said, "Duck you, I'm out. BTW in about 8 mins. You're going to have a slight issue up front." I watched him scramble to find someone from the day shifts to come stop the run from dying. He could not. As far as how it turns out, I no longer work for retards, nor serve a whole casino patrons at 2 a.m. Story 29. I used to work at a community mental health center as a therapist. The entire experience was terrible, and I started looking for a new job less than 1 month into starting there. I submitted my 2 weeks notice on a Monday, and then 2 days later, one of my clients attempted died. The day before, I had spent all day working with her on managing her symptom, and she had been agreeable to admitting herself into a hospital the next day. However, that night she had a break and ended up in the hospital against her will. Well, the next day, on a Wednesday, my supervisor and the director of the program pulled me into an office and spent almost an hour questioning my ability to practice and essentially blamed me for her attempt. I sat quietly, stewing for the entire time. I looked at my boss, who had been the worst supervisor ever because she was just a puppet for the higher-ups, and asked if she was going to say anything or defend me in any way. She simply stared at me. I started laughing and said, "Yeah, why would you start now?" The director began telling me that I would never make it in this field because of my attitude and didn't want me to work there anymore because he couldn't guarantee none of my other clients would try and attempt died. I simply looked at him and told him to go duck himself. Then I turned around, went back to my office, and calmly began packing my stuff into a box. The director came running after me, which caused all of my coworkers to take notice, and pretty much backpedaled like crazy, likely because he didn't want to get sued for all of the things he'd said about me. He then told me that he would pay me for the remainder of the 2 weeks I was supposed to be working there. The rest of my coworkers stopped what they were doing and helped me pack up my belongings, and there was a small line of people following me, with my stuff to my car on my way out the door. Worst job ever. Story 30. I wasn't so much the witness as the perpetrator of this particular I quit moment. I worked for a major stationery retailer. Not going to say which one, as it was bought out while I worked there, so it's a pain to explain it. I had a deputy manager that did nothing but sit on her arse and talk on the phone to her fiancé in the office all day. This wouldn't have bothered me too much, but you would take no end of crap if you required her to make any effort, even something as small as giving you the keys to the security cage to retrieve stock you'd sold. So one day I sell a desk and a computer. I ask her for the keys and she tells me to wait as she's on the phone. 15 minutes later, I'm still waiting, so I ask her again and get the response, "Oh, will you duck off and get a life?" and tosses the keys to me. She literally had them in her pocket. Obviously, I'm pissed, but the customer's been waiting long enough, so I go and get the stock. I walk back to where they're waiting next the till, and there she is behind the desk, apologizing that it took so long, and basically blaming the delay entirely on me. I told her I quit on the spot, and in a brief moment of madness, hurled a large ring of keys behind the desk where the display stand for the ink cartridges was. The display shook, and hundreds of cartridges decided that they wanted to try skydiving. The magnificent thing was this was a late shift, and my coworker had gone home for the day while I was retrieving the stock. She was going to have to tidy and reorganize this cluster duck herself. I briefly heard her yelling abuse at me as I walked out of the door. Story 31. I worked as a bartender at a private country club where some of the richest people in the state belong. Since there was essentially no management, I did inventory, liquor ordering, scheduling, training, bar-attended weddings, and dinner service. 30+ hours per week, with Monday and Tuesdays being closed every week. Essentially a non-stop job for very little money and a horrendous membership who didn't tip. My GM was a spiteful, pompous, alcoholic, and a terrible man. He terminated the executive chef's health insurance while his son was in an inpatient mental health care facility simply because he could, and because he was jealous that everyone respected him. I had worked there for 4 years, and the responsibilities kept on piling up, and my GM kept telling me that we were in a pay freeze. Right, 60,000 plus joining fees and 10K plus per year in dues. Real hard up for cash. I had just about had enough of all of it. I approached my boss and recapped all that I did for the club and how little I was compensated. He ever so gently reminded me of this pay freeze. I stood up and told him flatly that this would be my 2 weeks then. Flabbergasted, he offered me $3 more per hour then and there. I declined and proceeded to go on my 2-week vacation that I had planned for 4 months, the entire duration of my last 2 weeks. He refused to pay me for any of my vacation time I accrued and told the accountant not to take my calls. Duck him. The GM called me a month later to testify against a female employee that claimed harassment against the club. I hung up on him and immediately called my old coworker to tell her lawyer that I would vouch for her claim. They won the case and cost the club over $100,000 in litigation fees. The GM got demoted to dining room manager, and he subsequently quit to deal with his coke and prescription addiction. How the mighty have fallen, story 32. I didn't even actually have the job before I quit it, technically. This was going to be my first job in the city after moving in from the country to live with my sister. I had been putting in applications everywhere when finally a large Canadian chain grocery store offered me a part-time gig fairly close to home with decent pay. The interview had been arranged by my father-in-law, who had answered the call while I was out. He'd said the guy on the phone seemed a bit rude, but my brother-in-law wasn't known for having a long and easy temper, so I chalked it up to that. When I got to the grocery store, he took me upstairs to the office. A large stack of paperwork sat on the desk. He didn't even ask me any questions. He gave me the stack of paper to fill out, and I quickly realized they were the various forms needed for employment, including pre-authorized payments, that sort of thing. My parents, who had happened to be in town that week, were waiting downstairs when he took me to the ATM, the company has their own banking they offer, to set me up with an account. He left me for a few minutes with my parents while I set up the account. I told them I was pretty baffled. Turns out I had the job, but it wasn't as many hours as promised, and the guy was kind of weird. He made me uncomfortable. Can't really remember why. After talking with them, I felt confident this wasn't what I needed, and I went back upstairs to tell the guy. He stood up in a real hurry and grabbed all the paperwork, like a huge stack, probably 20 pages of stuff I'd already filled out and read. He threw it at the desk, and papers were flying, ducking everywhere as he screamed, "I can't believe I wasted all my ducking time on you!" I walked out, and I'm so glad I never actually took the job. But I did keep the bank account. Story 33. I put in my 2 weeks at the crap hole store called PetSmart. They wanted me to work Saturday and Sunday cashier for 8 hours as my last 2 days, even though I told them I couldn't make it 2 weeks prior, as I was going out of town with my new job. The manager was a total douche, so when I got that call at 9 a.m., wondering where I was, I said, "I'm 2 states away, have fun," then hung up. Later found out from a coworker he couldn't get anybody to work and had to man the register for 8 hours that day. Story 34. Worked at an independent gym in small-town British Columbia. At first, when I got the job, it seemed pretty straightforward. Sign people up, clean up as needed, make shakes, and sell protein and crap. You know how it is. Well, the further along I got into working, the worse it got. There were 2 main managers, a guy who controlled the business end of things, and a girl who controlled the fitness end, things like personal training and teaching boot camp classes. Well, the girl was pretty cool, but the guy was a complete cock-gobbling, nut-munching ass clown. He was so duck and anal about crap getting done that he would send me emails and call me on my days off just to tell me how to clean properly, and that I can't have my phone out during shift. The ducking guy texts his wife 24/7 in front of customers. I at least have the decency to put my phone away when I'm dealing with someone. So one day I was working and the guy manager came to me and tells me to clean the squash court. Turns out we don't have a mop, so I offer to go run across the street to Canadian Tire and pick one up really quickly. Obviously, he had a better plan. He made me take towels, tie them to a broom, and use a cup, yes, one you use for drinking water, to clean up the squash court. I took everything, went to the squash court, took a towel, wiped my ass with it, dunked it in the cup, and splashed I all over the court. Court was damaged, and I talked to the owner's son, who's cool, and he said his goof dad had to get a new court installed. Thank God I quit that place. Duck them. Story 35. I used to work in a copy room in a law office a few summers back. I was in college and it was more or less a summer job. It was a terrible place to work. Really passive-aggressive secretaries who would go way over my coworkers and my heads when they had a small complaint. It was just me and one other guy in there. He was the manager. I was the gopher. I tried my best, but directions were always unclear. I remember one time one of the secretaries suggested to my boss's boss that I be kept on menial tasks, so not to mess everything up. But it was worse for my manager, who took the brunt of the abuse. Nearly every day, he would get a phone call from his boss asking about some passive-aggressive email from a secretary. On top of that, he spent 2 hours traveling to this job. Needless to say, the pressure got to him one morning. I had just gotten into work. He started about 30 minutes before I did, setting up the office for that day when the phone rang. He answered it, and I guess it was from his boss again, because after about 2 minutes of listening, he shouted, "Don't talk to me like that, I'm a grown-ass man." He slammed the phone down, gathered his belongings, and left. I was dumbstruck. So much so, in fact, that I have no idea what happened after that. I think I held down the fort for that day, and they sent a replacement in the next day. I think I left for school about a month later. Worst summer job I've ever had. Best story of quitting I've ever witnessed.